Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Zillennial Falcon Show. I know that it's going to be nearly a month since the introduction of my channel, and I'm not going to pretend like I wasn't nervous about not being able to get another video done in the weeks that followed in time for New Year's. Then I tried extending the deadline to the 3rd due to it being the first full moon of the new year. Still not quite done yet by then. Maybe by Dia de los Reyes? Nope. The holidays themselves took up a lot of time, along with keeping up with and covering the remainder of the marketing for Avengers Doomsday. I also had to deal with some last minute but very necessary renovations for my home, and to add a cherry on top of the metaphorical shit cake, I spent the past week recovering from the flu. Now, I'm not making any excuses. I just want to remind you guys that I am learning how to create content in real time, and for that I am very grateful for everyone's patience. With that said, I know I originally said I was going to cover both Eyes of Wakanda and Captain America the First Avenger, but as part of this presently unfolding learning experience, I took longer than I wanted working on my review for Eyes of Wakanda. But fret not, this video will still be a double feature in that we'll also be covering all the remaining teasers for Avengers Doomsday before we officially begin our chronological countdown to Doomsday with Eyes of Wakanda. I hope you all had a very happy holiday season, and now let's not waste any more time and cover the remainder of the teasers for Avengers Doomsday. Now, I already covered the first one with Chris Evans returning as Steve Rogers, so if you haven't seen that one or would like a refresher, go ahead and watch that again. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and jump into the second teaser for Avengers Doomsday. As we open up in a forest area, we also see Chris Hemsworth back as Thor. He is holding Stormbreaker and sporting short hair, like how he had it in Thor Ragnarok and Avengers Infinity War. Compared to his previous appearance in Thor Love and Thunder, he is much more somber and serious this time around. He has bent a knee while praying to Odin for his safety in an upcoming battle with an unnamed enemy so that he can return to his adopted daughter Love. Portrayed by Chris Hemsworth's real-life daughter, we see him tucking Love into bed before cutting back to Thor still on his knee, praying to Odin while looking up. All throughout, we hear his prayer to Odin. Father, all my life, I have answered every call to honor, duty, and war. But now fate had given me something I never sought. A child, a life untouched by the sword. Lend me the strength of the All-Fathers, so that I may fight once more, defeat one more enemy, and then return home to her, but not as a warrior, but as warmth. To teach her not battle, but stillness, the kind I never knew. Please, Father, hear my words. Now, in my previous video, I mentioned a body of white text over a black screen, and we get that here as well, saying, Thor will return in Avengers Doomsday. In that video, I also mentioned that Chris Evans as Captain America is my favorite of the original MCU Avengers, and that's true. But Chris Hemsworth's Thor, when paired with solid directing and writing like in Ragnarok, Infinity War, and Endgame, is so fire. The growth he went through in the Infinity Saga alongside Tony Stark and Steve Rogers, and even afterwards considering what happened to him in Love and Thunder, man, it's hard not to root for him at this point. I have faith that the Russo brothers will cook like they've done before during their previous Marvel tenure, but I really hope they pair him up with the Loki variant from the Loki series. A lot of people think he's going to get the heroic sacrifice moment like Iron Man in Endgame, and quite frankly, I could see that. The emotional beat would be guaranteed to hit hard. Either Thor or Scott Lang. Hell, maybe both. Fuck it. It's the final event before the MCU reboots itself, so why not? Moving on to the third teaser for Avengers Doomsday, we are shown our first ever piece of marketing highlighting the involvement of alternate timelines and universes. By opening up with a destroyed and ruined X-Mansion, as shown, with the stained glass, destroyed furniture, and the displaced sign for Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. Throughout this teaser, we hear a monologue from the familiar voice of Ian McKellen, saying, Death comes for us all. It's all I know for sure. And the question isn't, are you prepared to die? The question is, who will you be when you close your eyes? We then cut to Patrick Stewart himself as Professor X sitting on the analog wheelchair from the X-Men movies produced by Fox, rather than the hovering yellow one from the animated series or Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. We then see a chessboard with one of the pieces floating in the air, further teasing Magneto. I know the castings were already confirmed a while ago, but getting to see it on screen definitely hit different, and I am so excited. So we then see Professor X successfully consoling Magneto, who appears distraught, like if he just lost a fight or something, which could be related to why the mansion was destroyed. Our final shot is James Marsden back as Cyclops, but this time, finally in a comic accurate blue and yellow suit firing his impact blast, also in a state of distraught. And what's interesting is the giant silhouette behind him. It's hard to imagine that being anything but a Sentinel, so we'll see if that's the case and how that gets worked into the plot. Maybe Doctor Doom hacked Sentinels to be adequately prepared in fighting the X-Men. Only time will tell. We get another set of white text over a black screen, but this time reading, "The X-Men will return in Avengers Doomsday." Now, growing up, I was always more into the anti-heroes and street-level vigilantes like Spider-Man, Daredevil, Punisher, Ghost Rider, Venom, etc. Not as much the mutant side, but that doesn't mean I couldn't appreciate a good X-Men story when I saw one. And obviously, the movie series from 20th Century Fox that began roughly 26 years ago is beyond iconic. For better and worse, the first Blade, X-Men, and Spider-Man movies were pivotal in shaping how the superhero movie genre would stylistically maneuver the 21st century. Deadpool and Logan brought back R-rated blockbusters to the box office. And while Star Wars The Force Awakens is the most commonly cited catalyst of the modern-day legacy sequel genre, I think it's interesting how X-Men Days of Future Past did it a year earlier by crossing over both the contemporary actors of the time, like James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender, with the seasoned ones that came before, like Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart. And less glamorously, but equally iconic, are the notorious production stories of X-Men The Last Stand, X-Men Origins Wolverine, and The New Mutants. On the flip side, though, it's kinda hard not to feel like I keep being jerked around back and forth when it comes to the Fox version of the team. X-Men The Last Stand was supposed to be, well, the last stand for the main series, while the franchise lived on through prequels and solo movies like Origins, or a planned Magneto movie, until Origins flopped and forced Fox to rework the Magneto movie into X-Men First Class. And thank God for that, because that is one of the strongest entries in the series for me. But then they brought back the original actors for the follow-up in Days of Future Past. So finale number 2. And don't get me wrong, I love Days of Future Past. Another one of my favorite in the series. But then 3 years later, we get Logan, a much more somber chronological conclusion to the franchise, but just as well done as Days of Future Past and First Class. In my personal opinion, X-Men First Class, X-Men Days of Future Past, both versions, the theatrical cut and the road cut, and lastly, Logan, are the 3 strongest entries in the entire X-Men franchise. That's not to say there aren't other good ones, but those 3 are the best ones for me. Those 3 as a microcosmic trilogy well encompass the entire franchise for me, besides the Deadpool movies. But anyways, then Dark Phoenix was the last one they put out in theaters the year before COVID hit, and I'm not really in a rush to talk about that one, so we'll get to that when we get to it. Along with the New Mutants, which was quietly dropped on Disney Plus after Disney bought 20th Century Fox in 2018, which resulted in Marvel reacquiring the movie licensing rights to X-Men, Fantastic Four, and the spin-offs like the Deadpool and Wolverine movies. So yeah, considering we've already had not one, but 2 well-done departures with this universe, this final outing in the next 2 Avengers movies really needs to be worth the effort. And now we get to the end of the holiday marketing campaign for Avengers Doomsday with the final teaser. So we open up to Shuri unmasked, but otherwise wearing her Black Panther outfit, walking in a barren wasteland, Given its previous and reoccurring appearances throughout the multiverse saga, I'm assuming this is the Void from the Loki series. Perhaps while it's being slowly turned into Battleworld, though there are people online who think this scene isn't meant to take place in the Void, since this was shot on location, whereas green screen is used for most of Marvel Studios' VFX, including the Void. This time it's Shuri who gets to provide the monologue saying, "I've lost everything that matters to me. The king has his duties to prepare our people for the afterlife. I have mine." Quite a bombshell. We already know that Shuri lost her father in Captain America Civil War, her brother in Wakanda Forever, as a result of the real-life tragic loss of Chadwick Boseman, may he rest in peace, and her mother later on in the same movie. However, and spoiler alert for Wakanda Forever, Shuri learns in the post-credit scene that prior to his passing, T'Challa birthed a secret heir with Nakia, also named T'Challa. Does this mean something happened to Shuri's nephew and sister-in-law? Is Doctor Doom responsible? A lot of crazy implications. We then cut to the No Cortas Namor, who along with his soldiers also seem to be present in this barren wasteland. We cut back to Shuri, who is now walking alongside M'Baku, approaching and introducing himself as King M'Baku of Wakanda. Remember that Shuri made him king at the end of Wakanda Forever, to none other than Ben Grimm from the Fantastic Four, who responds by introducing himself as Ben of Yancey Street, between Broome and Grand. This is the version of Ben Grimm we most recently saw in the Fantastic Four movie released in 2025, and of everything we've seen in all four trailers, this was the most novel fan service, but I still really enjoyed it. What's interesting is that Fantastic Four and Eyes of Wakanda are the two most recent Marvel projects. What's interesting is that Fantastic Four and Eyes of Wakanda are the two most recent Marvel Studios projects, both being released last summer. We then cut to the final moment of the teaser showing M'Baku and Shuri boarding an aircraft before Shuri turns around and does the signature Wakanda Forever pose by crossing her arms. I assume it's towards Ben Grimm, but editing for trailers can be sneaky. We get one final body of white text over a black screen writing out, "The Wakandans and the Fantastic Four will return in Avengers Doomsday," while we hear music from the Black Panther movies play. This teaser feels like a crossover encore for the marketing campaigns of both Fantastic Four and Eyes of Wakanda. Again, the two most recently released Marvel Studios projects from last summer, especially since it simultaneously announces the return of both the Wakandans and the Fantastic Four. After each teaser, we get the official December 18th, 2026 release date, followed by the official Avengers Doomsday clock first seen in the first teaser for Avengers Doomsday, each trailer counting down from a specific time based on which week it came out during the marketing campaign, using the units of months, days, hours, minutes, and seconds. Okay, so now that Marvel Studios has completed this initial wave for their Avengers Doomsday marketing campaign, I have some very mixed feelings. On one hand, it was nice to not only finally get something in regards to marketing and promotion of the film, and every teaser did at least something for me. But on the other hand, the lack of a full-length trailer to culminate this initial campaign feels like a missed opportunity. Not to mention that the way this marketing ploy was handled felt very gatekeeping and out of touch. This has been a stressful, if not ambitious start to the promotion of Avengers Doomsday. Marvel Entertainment has since released a live Doomsday clock on their YouTube channel. But before we can begin our own countdown to Doomsday on this channel, I want to make sure that everybody listening is on the same page. I have mentioned the Marvel Cinematic Universe a lot, and not everybody is massively nerdy enough to notice if the logo specifically says Marvel Studios or in association with Marvel. And that's okay. That's why I'm here, to do the opposite of gatekeeping. However, I'm currently not going to get into the entire history of Marvel because quite frankly, that's far beyond the scope of Countdown to Doomsday. From the company's origins as timely comics in the 30s and 40s, to Jack Kirby and Stan Lee spearheading the industry's response to the space age now known as the Silver Age in the superhero and comic book industry. Marvel's real-life history deserves its own series, and if that's something you'd like to see, Make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. But anyways, picture this scene. It's Marvel in 1996. The comic book market has bubbled due to increased prices and oversaturation of limited edition covers for the same story. 9 out of 10 comic book stores in the US have closed. Also, following Marvel management's undervaluing of their writers and artists, those creators go on to either join a competition or start their own comic book companies. Even the office equipment is being sold just to keep the lights on, while the remaining creators ask themselves if they're about to write the last ever Marvel comic. Then, on December 27th, Marvel files for bankruptcy. One of the ways Marvel sought to financially recover was by licensing the rights to their characters, particularly the movie rights to movie studios. Most notable examples include licensing X-Men and Fantastic Four to 20th Century Fox, Blade to New Line Cinema, and Spider-Man to Sony Pictures Entertainment. Upon financial recovery, Marvel decided to form their own movie studio and release their debut production in 2008, Iron Man. Like I had previously mentioned, this is an abridged history of Marvel Studios, and I will get more into the nitty-gritty for when I review Iron Man, since as previously mentioned, its production is the culmination for the larger story on how Marvel defeated bankruptcy entering the 2000s. But following Iron Man, Marvel Studios changed the state of the movie industry by building a shared continuity out of Iron Man and their following productions. This resulted in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Sometimes it's been designated as Earth 616, and other times Earth 199999. That is number 1, followed by 5 digits of the number 9. And no, the MCU being designated as 616 is not a recent development. Even as far back as Thor the Dark World, one of the characters talks about the multiverse, and behind him is a proposed illustration with the native universe being the MCU, designated as 616. Personally, I think both are valid, so here at the Zillennial Falcon Show, we're gonna have our cake and eat it by simply referring to it as the Marvel Cinematic Universe for the Infinity Saga. Once we've completed Endgame and reached Loki to begin the Multiverse Saga, we will switch to calling it the Sacred Timeline, which is its primary designated name by Marvel Studios. One last thing to cover are the guidelines for the Zillennial Falcon Show's countdown to Doomsday. Official Sacred Timeline chronological designations by Disney and Marvel, along with the chronological compilements of Geek Critique and Digital Spy, are taken into account. Once again, I will primarily refer to it as the MCU until we start getting to the multiverse stuff. And for those of you who know, the Sacred Timeline opens itself up to alternate universes following the event of Loki. And these universes include, but are not limited to, 20th Century Fox's interpretations of the X-Men and Fantastic Four, Sony's previous version of Spider-Man, like Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, and Marvel Animation's What If series. Therefore, we'll be focusing on the MCU and its initial Infinity Saga that it built up to from its debut with Iron Man and culminated with Infinity War and Endgame. Immediately after is Loki, and depending on how much time is left, we'll either cover those alternate universes either before or alongside the consecutive entries in the Sacred Timeline. Worst case scenario, the countdown to Doomsday will be entirely Sacred Timeline content, and the year between Doomsday and Secret Wars will be spent focusing on alternate continuities. We will also be working with the assumption that all of the MCU content produced by Marvel Television is still canon. Since Disney and Marvel Studios have confirmed that at least the shows that were originally produced for Netflix like Daredevil, The Punisher, and The Defenders are canon, we will be taking this retrospective venture as an opportunity to revisit the Marvel Television collection that was produced with the intention of being MCU canon, though having yet to be fully confirmed as canon by Marvel Studios, like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter, Inhumans, The Runaways, and Cloak and Dagger. We can also talk more about Marvel's internal conflict between its movie studio and television department when we get to those, because eventually this real-life Marvel Civil War does show itself in how the old television series maneuvers still technically being MCU canon, but not allowed to cross over actors from the movies, or not having significant events from the shows directly acknowledged by the movies in any way. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. Let's go ahead and start our own countdown to Doomsday by reviewing Eyes of Wakanda. Eyes of Wakanda is an animated anthology prequel series directed by Todd Harris and released on August 1st, 2025, exclusively on Disney+. In the prologue to the first Black Panther movie, we learned that at some point, currently still unspecified, millions of years ago in the ancient history of Wakanda and the overall MCU, a meteorite made of an alien mineral known as vibranium collided with Earth's orbit and landed in the continent of Africa. In the comics, vibranium is the second strongest metal, right behind adamantium, and we will see it continuously appear all throughout the MCU. 5 tribes settled where the meteor landed and called it Wakanda. The 5 tribes being the Merchant Tribe, the Border Tribe, the River Tribe, the Mining Tribe, and the Jabari Tribe, the last of whom exercised a microcosm of Wakandan isolationism in the mountains, while the remaining tribes lived under the rule of the first Black Panther named Bashenga. From this point on until way after the events of the show, Wakanda actively withholds revealing any scope of their vibranium technology and engineering to the rest of the world. The opening theme begins with the Marvel Animation logo, accompanied by the moments from all 4 episodes cut and edited together. We get this for every episode, so it's worth addressing now because it is really well drawn. For the show's animation style, Todd Harris draws influence from hand-drawn and matte painting styles, along with martial arts films and superhero comic book posing for the action scenes. He also specifically cites the artists Ernie Barnes and Dean Cornwell. The first episode is called Into the Lion's Den, and it opens up overhead the coast of Crete during 1260 BC. Suddenly, the coast is approached by a fleet of raiders, causing the local Minoans to panic after it is revealed the fleet sports lion iconography in honor of their notorious leader named the Lion. A character original to the show who is apparently attempting to self-apotheosize by perpetuating a reputation where he is allegedly a god. Amidst the panicking crowd is a woman we'll later learn is named Noni, who appears to be more inquisitive than shaken. By the time the Lion's fleet docks, they have already begun their assault on the coast of Crete by firing arrows at the guards occupying the watchtowers. The Lion's lieutenants then step down from the ship onto the coast. The Lion has assembled warriors from various cultures to serve as his lieutenants, including a Middle Eastern blade master, a Viking shield maiden, a Samoan warrior, and a Ronin swordsman. They lead a larger legion of followers loyal to the Lion. One very brave Minoan warrior armed with an axe tries to resist, and for whatever it's worth, he does successfully incapacitate a few of the Lion's goons until a horn is played, apparently signaling the Lion stepping down from the ship as the remainder of his followers begin to kneel. We don't see his face since he is wearing a golden lion mask, but once the Minoan warrior sees him, he lunges at the Lion. The Samoan warrior offers to deal with him on the Lion's behalf, but the Lion insists on handling it himself. The Minoan warrior cries death to the false god as he attempts to swing his axe at the Lion, who grabs the blade with a vibranium gauntlet. He then uses the kinetic energy from the blow to explode the axe in the Minoan warrior's face, similarly to how we've seen vibranium armor used in the Black Panther movies. We cut back to Noni hiding from the Lion and his raiders with the other villagers before a Lion raider sneaks up behind her and puts a bag over her head, successfully kidnapping her and other citizens of Crete. The Lion and his followers have brought them on board his fleet, where it's revealed that they cultivate slavery through Stockholm Syndrome, when the first thing they do with the captive Minoans is offer them food. Going back to the Lion's aspirations of apotheosis, his followers describe this practice with manipulative language of the Lion's grace, or divine purpose, as well as trying to gaslight them into believing they've suffered so much that they're mistaking benevolence for bondage. Really gross stuff. A follower then throws Noni into a private room where another follower is holding a burning cast iron brandishing the Lion's emblem. This is when Noni drops the pretense of being a hopeless victim and confidently declares to the follower that no one is my master. We then cut back to 6 weeks earlier in Wakanda and learn that Noni is from the Merchant Tribe as well as a former member of the Dora Milaje, the king's elite guards. She is summoned by Ikea, leader of the Dora Milaje. We also learn that the Lion is a former captain of the royal guard named Nkati, who is also from the Merchant Tribe, as well as the second greatest warrior in Wakanda, only behind the king. According to Akia, his restless ambition earned him the nickname the Lion. Akia explains further that the Lion has vanished from Wakanda, taking a cache-carrying vibranium weapons and relics such as a metal fan blade, his mask, a hammer, and the gauntlet from earlier with him, with the intent of building his own personal kingdom outside of Wakanda. Akia then explains how Noni is the perfect candidate for this mission because everyone else available was personally trained by the Lion, except for her since she was expelled for refusing to work with the group and walking her own path instead of the one set out for her. Therefore, the Lion won't see her coming. So Akia assigns Noni with the mission of bringing the Lion and his stolen cash back to Wakanda so that she will be welcomed back as Adora Milaje. Cutting back to the present day, and Noni on the Lion's ship, she escapes her captivity while liberating the other prisoners, arming them with weapons and a fighting chance for freedom, while letting them know there is always another path. Noni then makes it out of the boat and sees it tied and docked with other boats in the middle of the ocean, hiding in plain sight. She uses her prowess in combat and stealth to get deeper and deeper, and get this, into the lion's den. Get it? Because it's the name of the episode. On her way, Noni finds the Viking shield maiden with just the captured women, beginning the process of grooming them by threatening them and telling them to smile. Noni intervenes, and some of the women who have already been fully indoctrinated ring a bell notifying the lion of the commotion. She then ends up having to fight all of the lion's lieutenants at once, in this epically animated sequence, stretching across the lion's fleet, and at one point underwater, where she finds an abundant amount of human skeletal remains that have resulted from the lion's oppressive operation. But thanks to her Dora Milaje training, she is ultimately able to outmatch them. At one point, it looks like the Shield Maiden has Noni on the ropes and tells her, "If you kneel now, he may still allow you to serve." To which Noni responds, "I have never been good at following orders," before stabbing the Shield Maiden in the arm with an arrow previously fired by a lion follower, and then gets back in the fight. All throughout, we cut back and forth to a montage of the lion suiting up with his vibranium weapon and armor as Noni gets closer to him. Noni finally approaches the ship where the lion resides, finding him already waiting for her, calling her impressive due to her having been the only one to have gotten as far as she has. After inviting her onto his ship, he introduces himself to Noni, explaining that before he became the lion, he was originally sent out of Wakanda under assignment as a Hatud Zeraze, Wakanda's secret network of spies now known as the War Dogs, sent out across the world to carry out missions the Wakandan government doesn't want known to their citizens. The Lion then tries to directly manipulate Noni by highlighting their similarities as independent thinkers, while insisting that he is freeing his slaves from their suffering, as they're shown forging chains. Noni explicitly disagrees, and the Lion starts to crash out, insisting they're alike. After she doubles down, they have an epic battle on his ship. At one point, the Lion slashes Noni's right eye, but she gets the upper hand by sabotaging his vibranium weapons against him. He sets off a vibranium kinetic energy bomb, blowing up his fleet with him on it. Noni successfully retrieves the Lion's vibranium mask, but is unable to recover the other weapons that continue sinking. Amidst the sinking vibranium technology is an axe resembling the one that appears in the museum in the first Black Panther movie. And according to the museum curator in that scene, the axe was allegedly found in Benin during the 7th century. So it's possible that the Lion's fleet was docked near the coast of Benin. We then jump ahead to Noni, now sporting an eye patch, back in Wakanda and being debriefed by Akia. Noni expresses regret over not being able to recover all that the Lion stole, nor being able to bring him back to Wakanda, but Akia insists that she succeeded, and formally offers to reinstate Noni as Adora Milaje, to which Noni declines, stating that Akia's original assignment which got her removed from Adora Milaje was correct. Noni is unable to walk a path set for her. While she wishes to serve Wakanda, it can't be as Adora Milaje. Akia then privately discusses with Noni how this mission was really a test for her to decide if she would like to become a war dog, always sensing this would be the path for Noni, but needing her to find it for herself. Noni accepts, determined to recover the remaining vibranium technology and prevent future threats to Wakanda. The episode then ends with Akia formally welcoming Noni into the War Dogs. For the closing credits, we get a visual recap of the episode's events, but beautifully stylized like a matte painting. We get this following every episode, recalling the events. We get this matte-style painting recap in the credits following every episode. The second episode opens up showing the outside of the walls of Troy. What's interesting is that, unlike the first one, this episode doesn't display a graphic saying the title of the episode or the year it takes place. IMDb, Disney Plus, and even Wikipedia were cross-referenced for confirmation that not only is this episode called Legends and Lies, but it takes place during 12,000 BC. We then cut to a raven on a skeleton holding a Greek flag, giving us an idea of how long the Trojan War has been going on up to this point. We then see the Greek warriors known as the Myrmidons rolling a giant battering ram constructed by Odysseus, bearing the Omega symbol. The Omega symbol is the last letter in the Greek alphabet, and it is also used to signify an ending, especially here being the last phase of the war. They are spotted by Trojan guards who deploy Amazon archers. Despite being a Greek myth, some historians believe that the myth itself was inspired by women-led cultures who migrated from Greece to somewhere between Eurasia and Asia Minor, making their alignment with Troy geographically plausible. The Amazons strike the Greek soldiers with arrows and cauldrons of a boiling hot liquid poured atop the battering ram. One of the Myrmidons reminds Odysseus that the Trojans are relentless, to which Odysseus responds with, "Perhaps, but we have something they do not. Achilles." That's right, folks. Marvel has taken a crack at the iconic protagonist of the classical Greek epic that is the Iliad by Homer. Odysseus' plan is to distract the Trojan army while Achilles infiltrates the walls of Troy, who succeeds only to find even more walls awaiting from within, further preventing the Myrmidons from reaching King Paris and Queen Helen of Troy. Among the Myrmidons infiltrating alongside Achilles is Wakandan war dog Bakai, here operating under the alias of Memnon. In the Iliad, Memnon was the king of Ethiopia who fought alongside the Trojans, whereas this iteration of the myth shows them not only as allies, but as best friends. It is here where he discreetly uses a compact Wakandan telescope type of device to locate a vibranium necklace that was one of the recovered items in the previous episode, now worn by Helen. The Myrmidons get spotted by some Amazons, who are immediately disposed of by Achilles. Once the battering ram fails to break through, Odysseus calls for a retreat. Achilles is nearly shot in the head with an arrow before Memnon catches it with his hand. Achilles insists on continuing the fight, but Memnon convinces him to retreat and fight another day. We then cut to nighttime where Memnon privately heals himself with vibranium technology. Memnon then rejoins Achilles by a fireplace. It is here where Achilles shares his doubts regarding the past 9 years of warfare and tragedy with Memnon. He also expresses a desire to become a legend, to which Memnon replies, "Legends are lies, my friend. Tales told by those who never did, to those who never will." It is here where we get the title of the episode by having the comparison between legends and lies literally spelled out. Memnon then tells Achilles that we fight for home, making him believe that he's talking about Greece when he actually means Wakanda. At one point, he teases Achilles by saying, "Someone has to be here to put the coins on your eyes for the ferryman." This is in reference to the ancient Greek practice of placing coins over the eyes of the deceased. The idea being that it covered the toll fee through the river Styx into the underworld. Fellow Myrmidon Pharaoh uses Memnon's joke to segue into sincerely questioning Memnon's loyalties, to which Achilles responds by defending Memnon. Pharaoh calls Memnon a barbarian, which is a historically accurate use of the word due to the root word barbaros meaning outsider. The conversation then shifts to Odysseus displaying a really cool miniature display of a horse to begin discussing his latest strategy. Memnon sneaks away from the group to use a Wakandan communications device, presumably a precursor to shortwave radio, to get in touch back home with Wakanda and notify his commanding officers that he has located the artifact. He ultimately receives the directive of, "Do not return home without it." The next morning, as the Trojan horse is being constructed, Achilles and Memnon contemplate the conclusion of the war that awaits them, and end the conversation with Achilles gifting Memnon a charm, bearing a trident he originally received from his mother. In Greek myth, Achilles is the son of the sea goddess Thetis, so that could be symbolically alluded. The Trojan horse successfully infiltrates Troy, as the Trojans pull it in to celebrate the alleged surrender of Greece. After the Trojans have finished celebrating and settled in for the night, the Myrmidons begin their assault. Though initially stealthy, they're eventually caught by a Trojan guard who uses his final breath to just about ring a bell, alerting his peers of the intruders. Amidst the battle, Achilles looks for Memnon, just to see him in the distance abandoning his fellow Myrmidons to pursue the necklace. They share a look as Memnon departs to finish his mission. Memnon successfully reaches the palace and confronts Paris and Helen for the necklace in exchange for allowing them to escape. Achilles arrives to see them leaving while Memnon stands there and starts to assume a traitorous alliance between them. To make matters worse, Memnon is unable to provide clarity and context for his friend due to the confidential nature of his mission as a war dog. Achilles' feelings of rage and betrayal gradually begin to escalate, and just when it seems like he's about to calm down, Memnon asks him to just let me go home. When Achilles realizes Memnon was never talking about Greece, all bets are off, and combat ensues. Achilles attempts to destroy the necklace, but accidentally sets off a kinetic energy blast, learning of its power. Upon this discovery, Achilles decides that he will keep it for Greece. Due to this actively interfering with his mission, Memnon has no choice but to fight his former friend. He activates a vibranium armor piece for his arm, and they battle until Memnon incapacitates Achilles by slicing his heel. Not fully undeterred, Achilles attempts one last strike before Memnon deflects his blow in a way that directs Achilles' blow to himself. With his final breath, Achilles asks Memnon why he did what he did, and if all of it was a lie. Memnon responds that he did it for home, and that not everything was a lie. He then places 2 gold coins on Achilles' eyes for the ferryman. We then cut to 6 months later and see Bakai back in Wakanda, walking with a limp due to his injuries from battling Achilles. When he is called directly by name, Bakai does not answer the first few times due to having spent nearly a decade using the alias Memnon. Bakai apologizes, explaining that he's still getting used to it. We then see that the person calling his name is an elderly Noni from the first episode, still sporting her eye patch, and who now seems to have taken over Akia's role in the prior episode. Noni then begins to empathize by recounting her first mission as a war dog, and trying to reassure Bakai that his mission is accomplished. Nonetheless, Bakai feels conflicted about having spent a decade of his life building a fake life with fake relationships that by design were not meant to last, admitting he feels more alone back in Wakanda than he ever did outside of it. He asks to be sent back out to the field, to which Noni permits. However, she tells him that out there is no path, and if you do not wish to get lost, you must be certain of what it is you are searching for. But Kai responds by tightly clutching the charm given to him by Achilles, thus concluding the episode. The next episode opens up at a snowy temple displaying a symbol known as the Mystic Knot, designated as being set in China during 1400 AD. We cut to inside and see our protagonist, Wakandan war dog Basha, wake up from sleeping next to a woman we'll later learn is named Jirani. He sneaks into the temple's altar room and snatches a sacred stone dragon statue with a vibranium fan as its tongue. On his way out, he gets caught and chaos ensues as he escapes the temple while pursued and successfully reaches his hidden Wakandan jet. Kinda crazy to think about how in this universe, Wakanda invented air travel centuries before the Wright brothers. On his flight back to Wakanda, he communicates with his coordinating officer and friend Ebo, who mentions that he had previously assumed Basha was lost to a great power of legend local to where Basha was operating. They re-enter Wakanda and dock in the War Dog's base seen at the end of the first episode. Ebo, along with their superior Captain Rakim, scolds Basha for taking the entire statue instead of just the vibranium fan used for the dragon's tongue. They place the dragon statue in a room with other artifacts, including the lion mask and necklace from the previous episodes. Meanwhile, a member of the tech team inspecting Basha's ship is incapacitated by someone not yet seen on screen. Once Basha, Ebo, and Rakim are notified, the first two head towards the docking area, where they, along with us, are introduced to the immortal Iron Fist of Kunlun. That's right, folks. We get our first sign of a larger shared universe with the first ever on-screen chronological appearance of the Iron Fist, the first ever to be adapted directly by Marvel Studios, whereas the Netflix show was produced by Marvel Television. The Iron Fist interrogates Ebo on the whereabouts of Basha. Under the guise of taking the Iron Fist to Basha, Ebo leads the Iron Fist into a locked room filled with Wakandan warriors. But nonetheless, the Iron Fist is able to incapacitate enough of these elite warriors to successfully escape. Something that I thought was cool is how right before the fight begins, the Iron Fist swears in Mandarin, with censored subtitles and all. The way this fight was resolved very much gave me pro wrestling vibes, in which both parties maintained their aura with a graceful, if not unclear loss. In this case, the Iron Fist is shown to be capable of defeating at least some Wakandan warriors, but not all, hence needing to escape. Rakim deduces that the Iron Fist could have only successfully infiltrated Wakanda by following Basha, who obviously didn't cover his tracks. This episode plays out like a screwball buddy comedy, with Basha and Ebo having to cover up as much of their mess as possible before Rakim can fully blame them. Basha manages to find the Iron Fist, and they briefly fight before the Iron Fist's mask comes off, revealing the mantle to be worn by Jirani, the woman sleeping next to Basha in the beginning of the episode. We then cut to a montage, starting with Jirani finding an unconscious Basha in the snow, taking him in, mending his wounds, and providing him a platform for medical rehabilitation. We also see Jirani showing the dragon statue to Basha, who notices the vibranium tongue. We also see them developing feelings for each other, which leads into the opening scene of them sleeping together and Basha leaving. Only this time, we also see that Jirani was also awake and immediately opens her eyes to grab her Iron Fist garb. We then see her discreetly get on board Basha's ship while he's escaping. Cutting back to the present, Jirani tells Basha that taking him in went against every instinct of hers, while revealing that she was also spying on him to investigate his intentions. Once they realize that Jirani will not leave without the statue, they resume fighting. At first, Jirani successfully incapacitates Basha, but only temporarily, as he follows her into the artifact room seen earlier. Basha explains to Jirani that the vibranium artifact was originally stolen, to which Jirani responds by emphasizing the sacredness of the statue at large to her community since. So the fight resumes once more. Basha manages to end the fight using a vibranium weapon that fires restraints, which successfully manages to hold Jirani. Basha asks Jirani how she has been able to fight as hard and as long as she has, to which she responds by explaining her origin story of defeating the immortal dragon Shao Lao and drawing power from his molten heart to earn the mantle of the Iron Fist. Jirani then charges her fist and uses it to escape her restraints. Ebo then enters the fray, ready to apprehend Jirani. It is here where he also expresses having reached his emotional threshold of being tired of everyone having to clean up after Basha. Basha pleads for a compromise, but while he converses with Ebo, Jirani uses her charged fist to delicately remove the vibranium tongue. She scolds Basha by telling him that if he had told her from the start, she would have helped him. Basha confesses and owns up to trust issues, not just with Jirani, but with Ebo as well, so he apologizes to both. Basha successfully convinces Rakim that the entire ordeal was a training exercise coordinated by Ebo, who plays along. Rakim responds by expressing interest in transferring Ebo to fieldwork. Ebo and Basha then assist Jirani in discreetly departing Wakanda, thus ending the episode. We then reach the final episode titled The Last Panther, set in Adwa, Ethiopia during the Italian invasion and massacre of 1896 AD, opening up with the town of Adwa and destruction. Our main characters are veteran Wardock Kuda and Prince Tafari, third in line for the throne and therefore motivated by wanting to establish a personal legacy. As part of his Wardock training, he is riding alongside Kuda. Their mission is to retrieve a vibranium axe that was part of the lion's stolen loot in the first episode, now having somehow made its way from Benin to Adwa. Prince Tafari, while inexperienced, is also well read as shown by his assessment of the socio-political circumstances of Italy attempting to invade Ethiopia, as well as familiarity with Wakandan history, even quoting Noni at one point. However, Prince Tafari was assigned only to observe Kuda, whose experienced sense of pragmatism clashes with Prince Tafari's naive desire for legacy. The violence of the Italian government escalates so bad that Kuda becomes concerned for Tafari's well-being and orders the prince to not take an opportunity to retrieve the axe. The prince disobeys and he justifies his disobedience of an order by quoting director Noni from the first two episodes. It is the nature of a war dog to walk their own path, not the one set out for them. A paraphrase of what she was told by Akia at the end of the first episode. This is where we also learn that Noni is considered the first war dog to ever recover one of Wakanda's missing artifacts. Now during the car ride back to Wakanda, Kuda reprimands Tafari and tries to discourage him from becoming a war dog for foolish glory. Tafari responds by attributing the success of the mission to his pursuit of foolish glory, and he once again busts out his chops as a history buff by bringing up Kuda's legendary reputation as an agent from the mining tribe who slayed the pirate Ben Pease. Kuda explains that he has a family now and is therefore motivated to be more cautious and considerate of his safety when conducting Wardog missions. He then explains to Tafari that the Wardog's mission is what matters, not the story told about it. A nice thematic callback to Legends and Lies, the second episode. Tafari confesses that he is looking for his own place in history on account of the throne being destined for the eldest. Their vehicle is suddenly intercepted by none other than the otherwise unnamed Wakandan Queen and Black Panther of the 23,000s. Their vehicle is suddenly intercepted by none other than the otherwise unnamed Wakandan Queen and Black Panther of the 23,000s. What's cool is her suit not only demonstrates the familiar abilities of the contemporary Black Panther suits seen in the movies, like producing shockwaves, but also new ones, like stealth mode. The choice of sound design makes her breathing through the suit sound like a growling animal, which feels like an homage to the Predator movies. The fight ends when the Black Panther explains herself and uses electromagnetic waves to emit images into the heads of Kuda and Tafari to show them the future she came from, revealing that 500 years from Kuda and Tafari's time, Earth is invaded by aliens known as the Horde, and on account of Wakanda refusing to cooperate with the other nations of the world to fight the intergalactic threat, the Horde is able to successfully take over the world, leaving members of the Dora Milaje, the General, and the Queen of Wakanda, who is also the last Black Panther. Amidst the destruction, we see the Golden City destroyed by lava being emitted by the Horde, along with a fallen panther statue, and most dramatically of all, the blotting out of the sun. According to the future Black Panther, Wakanda's laws dictate that we cannot help outsiders, which for those of us who remember the ending to the first Black Panther movie, obviously contradicts the continuity, since in the movie, T'Challa discontinued the isolationist practices of Wakanda. Continuing the exposition, the final queen of Wakanda uses a quantum scanner, originally built to study history, now used to travel back in time. Perhaps the invention ran adjacent to Tony Stark's invention in Endgame. She is trying to figure out what key point permanently sealed Wakanda's fate as an isolationist country. And it is here we see that she has been tuning in to the events of all the previous episodes. with specific frames from them being retconned as explicitly being seen from her point of view, such as Noni laying on a piece of rubble from the lion's exploded fleet, Memnon killing Achilles, and Basha inside the dragon statue altar room. When she visits each time period, she also analyzes each artifact, which reveals extra lore. We learn that the lion's mask is a modified combat helmet designated as part of the Destroyer class. We also learn that the Trojan pendant is a 12th generation V capacitor, meaning that it was built for storing electrical energy. After years of searching, she reaches the final moment of the opening scene, where Tafari reunites with Kuda after acquiring the axe. Her analysis attributes the axe to Benin, and also reveals that it's a vibranium metal hammer blade, as well as describing it as a field weapon component. She then explains to them that the axe represents a perfect hinge point, that if restored, could set everything right, and it all begins when a forgotten son of Wakanda finds the axe. When Kuda asks for the Black Panther to prove that she's from the future, she tells them that the queen is pregnant with the fourth child, who is a girl. The queen then vanishes back to her own timeline due to the quantum window in her technology closing. Tafari then confirms what she told them, so they agree to return the axe back to where they found it in Ottawa. We then cut back to the future Dora Milaje battling with the Horde as they try to prevent the Horde from accessing the time-traveling technology, simultaneously buying time for Kuda and Tafari. Kuda and Tafari similarly struggle in their own mission, as Tafari is nearly shot at by Italian colonizers, and Kuda uses vibranium to just barely survive the blast of a cannon hitting a nearby building atop them after he pushes Tafari out of the way. He directly orders Tafari to complete the mission, who makes Kuda proud by finally obeying an order. Tafari successfully places it in a grandfather clock, where he first found it. Cutting back to the future one last time, the Black Panther holds down the fort, with a final stand, screaming Wakanda forever. Pretty epic stuff. After Kuda and Tafari reunite and debrief with Wakandan elders and officials, they privately contemplate the irony of how, despite Tafari's mission being the most crucial to the future well-being of Wakanda, it will also be the most discreet. Tafari reassures Kuda that he finally understands what he was trying to tell him earlier in the episode, about how it is the mission that is important, and not the story that is told about it. Though he does wish he could see the new future they fought for. Now, I originally was going to discuss my final thoughts on each episode at a time, but despite being a successfully done anthology series, there's too much thematic interconnectivity to not acknowledge how, by design, each episode is also created to contribute to the larger tapestry that is the miniseries as a whole, rather than simply being well-made standalone stories, which they also are. But the pilot definitely sets the tone and introduces the thematic conflict that reemerges throughout the generations for the Wakandan war dogs. All in all, a really solid pilot that sets the tone for the remainder of this anthology series. I really like the way Noni's character arc depicts the classic but timeless struggle of trying to find a healthy balance between self-individuation and authentic integration into one's own community. Keeping in mind that her character here will be the archetypical heroic war dog with which the remaining protagonists of the series will be compared to. It's a really cool frame of reference to have available, not just for this series, but for the rest of the cinematic universe, as we continue to explore the stories of other heroes struggling to find balance between their personal desires and social responsibilities to their communities. In Legends and Lies, Bakai's arc echoes Noni's in that he has to balance his sense of identity between his duties as a war dog and his individual desires that inevitably follow having human emotions. In Bakai's case, it was the result of a nearly decade-long life that was his cover as Memnon, especially his closeness with Achilles. He chooses to resolve this conflict for himself by fully immersing himself in his work as a war dog, and asking Noni to send him back out into the field. As of the recording of this video, it remains unseen how that choice wound up working out for him. Similarly, we see Basha struggle with trusting and opening up to Jirani, on account of the discreet nature of a war dog's work, being antithetically unhelpful in preparing Basha for the abrupt experience of developing an emotional connection with another human being. Durrani for Basha and Achilles for Bakai. And lastly, this thematic struggle comes to a head when Tafari's arc of wanting to carve out his own legacy within Wakanda's larger history drives him to carry out its most important mission in regards to the safety of not only Wakanda, but the whole world by subverting the function of the War Dogs, and purposely keeping the vibranium axe out of Wakanda. All done with the understanding and acceptance that he will never receive any glory for it since the mission itself is what matters. Before we wrap up, we're going to go over what I'm calling the world building section and discussing connections and references to other works in the MCU. So spoiler alert for other movies and shows. The first episode, Into the Lion's Den, opens up with eagles flying overhead the coast of Crete. Eagles are symbolically associated with Zeus, and Greek mythology attributes Crete with being the birthplace of Zeus. As seen in the Thor movies, the Eternals, and Moon Knight, gods of a lowercase g both exist as traditional deities from mythology, but also through the ancient astronaut genre by having really old aliens cited as inspiration for myth. Hell, even Black Panther 2 got the No Cortas Namor as the MCU's anthropomorphic version of Kukulkan. In Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the antagonist for the third season, Hive, is suggested to have been the inspiration for the myth of Satan. We also do have references to real-life biblical monotheistic religions, like Daredevil being a practicing Catholic, Miss Marvel being raised Muslim, and Moon Knight having a Jewish upbringing as a child. So it's really interesting to see all these different angles towards the depiction of deities in the MCU right off the bat with the subtle use of real-life mythological symbolism and the antagonist actively attempting to self-deify through his reputation, propelled by the militarization of his pillaged resources. The Lion's characterization of being a Wakandan secessionist parallels that of N'Jobu in the first Black Panther movie, but the differences also show, with N'Jobu being motivated by radical revolutionary liberationism, whereas the Lion is entirely self-serving. Speaking of the Lion, his lieutenant possessing various skill sets and being from diverse backgrounds tempts me to at least consider the superficial similarities to other ensembles that we'll see down the line, like the Avengers, the main cast in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Guardians of the Galaxy, the Defenders, the Runaways, the Thunderbolts, etc. Very subversive chronological foreshadowing of what's to come in regards to world building by having a super team like this function as antagonists here. In the context of this story, they not only function as set pieces for action scenes, but also demonstrate the full global-sized scale of the Lion's ambition. While explaining the assignment to Noni, Akia uses a rudimentary version of the shifting sand hologram seen in the Black Panther movies. When Noni asks why she's never heard of him while receiving her assignment, Akia names secrecy as an essential practice to Wakandan security. We'll see plenty of more compartmentalized information among spies later on in Captain America and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. The vibranium axe in the museum is the one stolen by Claw and Killmonger in Black Panther. Noni is now sporting an eye patch, which reminds us of Nick Fury with his, along with how both characters lost their eyes to something cosmetically resembling a cat, with Noni's case being a human dressed as a lion, and Fury's being Goose from Captain Marvel, a flurkin resembling a cat. In Legends and Lies, the way Odysseus delivers the dialogue of "We have something they do not," Achilles, reminded me a lot of when in the Avengers, Tony Stark responds to Loki saying he has an army with, "We have a Hulk." At one point in the episode, Memnon privately heals himself with vibranium technology that is also a predecessor to what T'Challa used in Black Panther to stabilize Ross after he got shot. The Iron Fist mantle from the third episode, Lost and Found, is a reference to the Iron Fist from the comics. Also a mantle, passed down from generation to generation, with each wearer of the mantle being the peak of martial arts training, and having the handy-dandy bonus of being able to focus their chi into their fist to make it really hot and really strong, hence the name Iron Fist. So yeah, the adjective is metaphorical. The version in this show is an original interpretation and presumably a very early predecessor to Danny Rand, the most well-known version of Iron Fist in the comics, who is also the protagonist of the live-action show produced for Netflix by Marvel Television. Similarly to Basha, he was also stranded on a snowy mountain and taken in by monks. The way the animators illustrated her powering up her fist resembled the way it's designed in the Netflix show, with the energy growing inside of her flesh, showing bones and musculature. At some point, when Basha and Jirani are fighting, they wind up on early versions of the train seen in Black Panther. After the fight reaches the altar room, Jirani charges her fist, but Basha successfully blocks it using the lion's mask. This could be a visual reference to how Thor's hammer Mjolnir bounced off Captain America's vibranium shield in the first Avengers movie. When Jirani tells Basha her backstory about how she defeated the immortal dragon Shaolao and drew power from his molten heart to earn the mantle of the Iron Fist, it's a reference to the trial of initiation that every wearer of the Iron Fist mantle undergoes, including the most iconic one, Danny Rand. We now get to the final episode, The Last Panther. The opening scene gives us two references we already went over. The first one being the axe, meaning that the forgotten son from the future Black Panther's Kyle Reese style prophecy is actually Killmonger during the museum scene in the first Black Panther movie, and that his campaign in that movie, which resulted in T'Challa choosing to open up Wakanda to the rest of the world, sets off a chain of events where, following Wakanda's integration with the rest of humanity, Earth defeats the Horde. The second reference being Tafari mentioning Noni. On their way back to Wakanda, we catch a brief glimpse of the cosmic being known as Uatu the Watcher, making a quick cameo as he observes Kuda and Tafari from the clouds. The remaining Easter eggs and references to the larger cinematic universe are directly provided by the time-traveling Black Panther of the future. Her fight with Kuda and Tafari ends when they fight side by side like how Captain America and Bucky did in their fight against Iron Man in Civil War. When she shares her vision of the doomed future, we see a fallen panther statue. Perhaps it's the same one seen in Captain America's Civil War's mid-credit scene. What I think is interesting is how the time-traveling shenanigans work either way when interpreted as occurring either before or after the event of Loki. My headcanon is that the future with the Horde was originally a branch timeline that, to the convenience of the TVA, wound up re-intertwining itself back into the sacred timeline, and despite very nearly condemning the entire sacred timeline to an invasion from the Horde, ultimately made itself a necessary glitch of a closed loop within this controlled cosmic ecosystem. Similar examples of closed loop timelines branching from the sacred timeline can also be seen in the first half of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.'s 5th season, as well as the Runaways' final episode, and even in Loki, through his time-slipping powers. Despite that, I could see how it would take place after the event of Loki, considering it was, released after the completion of the Loki series. The chaotic time-traveling metaphysics of this episode can definitely also be viewed as occurring after the event of Loki, especially since this series was released after the series' completion. So an argument could be made that this is a result of the loom no longer being in operation. I just want to say really quick that trying to make sense of the metaphysics of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's timelines and universes, it was frustrating. Like, this isn't even scripted. I'm shooting straight from the hip. But yeah, I spent like 2 days diving into this rabbit hole. So believe it or not, this is the abridged version. We'll get into a full examination of the MCU's multiversal metaphysics when it becomes more relevant in projects like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Loki, and Avengers Endgame. I also want to say that when I first started recording this video after writing the script and editing it, I said that it was going to be almost a month since I released the first video introducing this channel. I realize now that it's going to be technically over a month, so I would like to once again reiterate that I thank you guys so much for your patience. I appreciate anyone and everyone still tuning in. And yeah, it was a little frustrating, a little stressful, a little nerve wracking, learning in real time amidst spending the holidays and enjoying the holidays with family and getting a lot of things done in my personal life that needed to get done. And on top of all that, research, again, learning in real time. And that was before I got hit with the flu that lasted a week. So, yeah, thank you guys so much.